George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd!
Let's start today's discussion on fallacies of context with a really complicated question. What role do Asian Americans play in Black Lives Matter, and what should they do about it?
You can see how white people have tried to align Asian Americans with whiteness in ways to separate and divide people of color and put Asians against blacks, which is obviously incorrect.
In recent years, these are some really important questions that came into the foreground starting in 2015, when a rookie police officer named Peter Liang shot and killed an unarmed man.
Peter Liang was grief-stricken and in tears back in February when he was convicted of second-degree manslaughter for the shooting death of Akai Gurley, an unarmed man who the police commissioner said just happened to be in a dark stairwell when the rookie officer fired his gun.
He was sentenced to a maximum of 15 years. But just 2 months later, his charges were reduced from manslaughter to negligent homicide, and he was given 5 months of probation instead of any time in prison. The reduction of Liang's sentence was viewed as yet another failure of the American legal system and its ineptitude when it comes to providing justice to the black community and their murdered family members. When Liang was originally indicted by a grand jury in 2015, nearly 15,000 people protested in support of the Chinese-American police officer.
Liang supporters felt he was being prosecuted for the wrongs of other officers who've avoided criminal punishment.
But contrary to how a lot of people remembered the protests, most of the protesters actually felt that Akai Gurley's family did deserve justice.
And Asian American leaders in the community at large are not saying that Peter Liang is innocent. He was convicted of official misconduct, which represents or reflects the fact that he just didn't do anything to help Akai Gurley.
However, they also felt that it was unfair that Liang, a Chinese-American police officer, was the first NYPD police officer to be charged for an unlawful on-duty shooting in over a decade.
This is far more than we have seen in any other case in recent memory. Eric Garner being choked to death by a police officer, not even an indictment in that case. Michael Brown, so many other cases in New York and across the country. Timothy Stansbury in New York City, which was a case almost identical in circumstances. Nothing in that case, no actions against the officer. None of these officers have even been fired from their jobs.
Many communities felt that the protests in support of Liang were a betrayal by another community of color, and this betrayal can still be felt today, 5 years later. This is part 1 of a series of videos where I'll be using recent tweets that refer back to Liang's murder case in order to explain fallacies of context. All of these tweets convey fallacies of context, which because of how they're formed, they appear really strong at first. But it's how the argument misleads you away from the context that makes them logical fallacies. And in order for you to see them, you have to pay close attention to the evidence that they use to support their conclusions. Let's start by talking about the concept of generalizations. Generalizations aren't necessarily bad or good. There aren't any inherent values to generalizations. The thing is, you can't claim anything about an entire group without making a generalization. The problems arise when claims are made about an entire group that don't accurately represent that group. That is in fact what Cindy's saying here in this tweet. She says, just because a small group of people did something bad doesn't mean the entire race is bad. So it's interesting that in order to support this proposition, she makes this claim. We've, meaning Asians, also caused destruction and pain for black people. The reason why fallacies of context are difficult to identify is because oftentimes their premises are true. So in order to support this conclusion, Cindy provides several facts. Her first premise cites the example of Peter Liang, and the second reminds us of Soon Ja-doo, the Korean-American shop owner who killed Latasha Harlins in 1991, shortly before the uprisings in LA. And lastly, she provides the example of discrimination in China against Africans. The fact that she uses these examples to support this conclusion about all Asians is called a hasty generalization. The thing is, they're all facts, but ask yourself, are these 3 examples enough to prove that Asians have caused destruction and pain towards black people? Hasty generalizations happen when someone makes a claim about a group using an inadequate number of examples from that group. What do the Chinese in China have to do with Asian Americans? Again, it's a fact. But how exactly does this premise relate to the conclusion? What makes this argument in these series of tweets more complicated is that there's actually a lot of evidence to support her conclusion. But if you're going to make a claim about a group of things, especially a group of people, you have to make sure that your examples both refer to that group and are enough to prove that you're right. Here's another tweet that looks really similar to a hasty generalization, written by a user named Miss Snacks. Miss Snacks' tweet is actually a reply to another tweet. This tweet here is actually referring to the case of Dallas police officer Amber Geiger.
Dramatic body camera video showed the chaotic moments after Geiger mistakenly entered the wrong home thinking it was hers, then fatally shooting 26-year-old Botham Jean.
If you don't remember, Geiger was arrested for killing a man named Botham Jean after coming home from work back in 2018. She mistook Jean for an intruder when actually she was in the wrong apartment, one floor below hers. She shot Jean and killed him. In her tweet, she refers back to the case of Peter Liang, and she uses what happened to Liang to make an assertion about Amber Geiger's case. Now, I will say that the accident fallacy in this tweet isn't really obvious. So let me explain what an accident fallacy is first. Think of an accident fallacy as the opposite of a hasty generalization. In a hasty generalization, someone makes a general claim about an entire group from a few examples of that group. In an accident fallacy, the opposite occurs. This happens when someone uses a broad claim and applies it to a specific case, even when that case contains significant differences. Because she's referring to the specific case of Liang, it makes the accident fallacy really difficult to spot here. But if you look at it, she's actually using Liang's case as part of a larger rule. That rule is actually the assumed premise here, that police officers rarely spend time in prison for murder. If you look closely, you'll see that Ms. Snacks is actually using the assumed premise as the generalization, then applies this generalization to the case of Peter Liang. And that's why Ms. Snacks believes that Liang's case proves that there's still time for one person to let everyone down. But if you look at the facts of Liang's case, you can see why you shouldn't automatically apply this generalization to the verdict of Jean's murder. Gurley's killing occurred while Liang was on duty, while Geiger killed Jean after she ended her shift. Liang killed Gurley in a stairwell while on patrol. Geiger killed Jean in his own apartment. Both men who were killed were black and unarmed, and they were killed by police officers. But that's where the similarities end. The generalization that police officers rarely go to prison for murder is a valid generalization, but that doesn't mean that it's true for every case. That's where an accident fallacy is committed here. A lot of us have the tendency to apply generalizations as if they're rules. By keeping this fallacy in mind, it really helps us to pay attention to the important differences within a class or a group of things. Because not all generalizations are facts.